Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we are making part 2 of the series which I started not long ago, orchid species that are easy, that are suited for beginners in my opinion. We voted this morning and you guys decided that this is the video you want to see today. So today I'm going to list another 5 orchids that I consider easy to grow. Mind you, all of these videos are based on my personal opinion and experience with these orchids. Some people will not consider them easy to grow at all. I'm trying to make a generalization of this. I try to stay away from orchid species which require dormancies or very dramatic drop in temperatures or require high humidity or have finicky roots or things of the sort. So those are the criteria that I based my choices on. So in the end, I do consider these orchids at least worth a look, a Google search, just to see what they're all about, and if you like them, decide if they will be suited for your environment or your growth space. So with that said, let us start. First of all, the Oncidium sotoanum. To this species we owe the beautiful Oncidium cherry baby and the Oncidium twinkles, and not only, I do believe the Oncidium catrinzoque is also a cross of this orchid, maybe even a primary hybrid. There are many similarities, but this is the original species. The Oncidium sotoanum is actually no different care-wise than the Oncidium cherry baby and the twinkles. If you typically do good with them, you should do very well with this guy as well. Now, you guys might know my struggles with Oncidium orchids. However, this does not mean that these are finicky orchids. It means I was doing something wrong. Before I came to this climate, I considered Oncidiums the easiest orchids to grow, easier than Cattleyas, because I just had a different climate, a different setup. So for 3 years, I was growing these orchids pretty successfully. My issues started here, but I fixed them. But in the end, that's a good thing, because now I know how to fix your issues if you have something similar to what I have. But before we get into culture, let's talk a little bit about the particularities. My orchid is a very young orchid. It is the first time it's blooming for me, and you can see the blooms are not impressive. I purchased it as a very young plant, and given the stress it has been through, it didn't really have the greatest of evolutions. However, the flowers are a little bigger than the Oncidium twinkles, but they have an almost identical fragrance. It smells beautiful, like a sweet syrup to me, very sugary. I cannot say it's chocolatey or very similar to the Oncidium cherry baby, but definitely reminds of that fragrance. The more flowers you have, the better, and this orchid can produce an abundance of flowers. Just imagine the twinkles, that's what this orchid can do as well. And the more flowers you have, the greater the fragrance will be as well. The flowers are a very nice pale pink, maybe a little lavender colored, and they have this really striking yellow center, which stands out in the flower as well. I would say they look more similar to the catrinzoque than they do to the twinkles shape-wise, but fragrance, it's almost identical in my opinion. And it's really just a joy to grow, provided you get the care right. And here is where we talk about care. Oncidiums prefer a lot of moisture. They are the best orchid for those of you who like to overwater a little bit, quotation mark. If you know you're prone to give a little bit too much love when it comes to watering, Oncidiums are the orchids which most probably will handle the moisture without any type of problem. These orchids are still epiphytic, so aeration is still important, but water-retentive media, and I would go as far as to say even media, are the best for these orchids. You can obviously go for bark mixtures, but I would go for finer bark, as I'm gonna show you with a different orchid, or sphagnum moss. You can mix the sphagnum moss with bark if you want, or with perlite, or even LECA, why not? This is what I have my orchid in. It grew in LECA and it didn't enjoy it, but I did leave some LECA inside the pot. You cannot see. I don't know why I'm showing you this, but I do have this orchid with LECA and moss simply because I didn't want to remove the LECA and destroy the root system. And you can see my orchid didn't even suffer dehydration after repotting. I would definitely go for water-retentive media with this orchid, even media. Their roots are the most sensitive part. But it doesn't mean they are finicky orchids or sensitive orchids. It just means that I was asking for too much of them in this particular climate. But if you have a cooler or more humid climate than mine, you can actually get away with semi-hydro or LECA with them. If not, definitely fine bark or sphagnum moss will do the trick, and you'll just have such a great time growing these orchids, particularly if your environment is not super hot. If it is rather warm, I would go for moss. It's just a pleasure to work with, and it's going to keep the Oncidium happy and hydrated. And other than that, it really is easy to grow. It is, however, prone to getting some tissue dieback, some spottings on the tip of the leaves. Some people say it's a temperature issue, some people suggest it's a bacterial infection or fungal infection. You'll probably notice that if you try to treat it, it's not gonna work. You can treat it if you want. I personally believe it has to do with environmental conditions, because I do discover the hotter I keep them, the more spotting and leaf tip dieback I have. The cooler I grow them, aka winter time, the greener they remain. So in my opinion, it's a temperature issue, but it doesn't mean that if they have a little bit of spotting, they're not healthy. I would not worry about that. I would just worry that you keep them hydrated in a very warm environment, and I do believe moss will do the trick. Overall, they are an easy orchid to grow. I have a tutorial which was made a long time ago in my previous environment, which most probably it's more close to what most of you would have, so check it down below in the description. And I do believe that's about it on this little orchid. It's an easy grower, and just because I had issues with it doesn't mean it's a finicky grower. Next up, we have the Ludicea discolor. This is a special type of orchid in the sense that it is not an epiphytic orchid like most other orchids we have in our collections. She is a terrestrial. But this is good news for home growers because she can totally be grown as a normal houseplant. I have her in a mixture of sphagnum moss and bark simply because I didn't have good soil. But this orchid was potted in a very fluffy soil with perlite. I think it's sphagnum peat moss. So definitely it can be grown in soil as long as you maintain it airy. Think African violets. I think if you can grow African violets, you can grow this orchid as well because it really doesn't require much. Regular feeding, of course, but not in high amounts. Any orchid fertilizer should be great for this orchid. It doesn't like strong light, so if you have a place in your home which provides bright shade, that should be just great for this orchid. It doesn't really like to stay dry all that much, particularly in my warm climate. Every time the medium got dry, this orchid started to wilt. But I watered it and immediately it perked up, so everything is fine. I currently have it in a self-watering pot and she appears to enjoy it quite a lot. So again, fluffy medium, keep it rather moist, and I do believe everything should be okay. Now, reading articles on this orchid, many of them suggest that you need to maintain high humidity. I actually don't believe this is the case. I did have quite a lot of moments in the summertime when it was just so hot that humidity was 30%, 20%. I didn't see any wilting or anything of the sorts with this orchid. I think more important it is to keep it hydrated rather than in high humidity. So if you ever wanted to have this orchid but you were put off by articles saying that you need a terrarium or very, very high humidity, I would just disregard that and do give it a go. This orchid is grown mainly for her foliage. Flowers are not all that interesting in my opinion, but they might be to you. Check down below a video in which you will see this orchid in bloom. Currently she has flower spikes. All of these stems, they do have flower spikes, and it will be interesting to see how she will look like since I prefer to grow her pendant like this. But personally, I don't grow her for the flowers. The foliage is really, really, really beautiful, and I will link you to some more videos that I made on this orchid or other orchids related to it. The foliage really, really is breathtaking. These veins are really shimmery in the sunshine, and the green is a very, very dark green. Overall, if you're into foliage plants, do consider this orchid. She's nothing like Phalaenopsis or Cattleyas or things of the sorts. For me, she is the orchid equivalent of an African violet, to be fully honest. So there are great chances that you will do okay with this orchid, even if you've never grown any other type of orchid, but you are pretty good with other house plants. Next up, we have a Vanda type orchid. This is Euanthe, formerly known as Vanda sanderiana, and it is a beautiful, beautiful species, one of my absolute favorites, which is really, really easy to grow as well. Now with Vandas, there is a little bit to know. I do have a tutorial on Vanda orchids, check it down below. They do prefer usually to sit mounted or bare-rooted or in baskets with very, very loose medium of sorts. They're not as water-loving as Oncidiums, let's put it like that. They're also worm-growing plants and they enjoy a lot of light. But given these conditions, usually they're a joy to grow. And the Sanderiana is no different than your typical typical hybrids. If you've ever had a Vanda hybrid such as the Pachara or the Princess Mikasa or all of these commercial hybrids, they are identical care-wise. This orchid is rather larger, I would say, in leaf span. The flowers are pretty large as well. She's not fragrant, but the colors are absolutely beautiful. And together with a few other species, it is at the basis of many big flowered hybrids nowadays. It doesn't have any particular quirks that I discovered in my experience. It doesn't take breaks. It does slow down in the winter time if you have a pronounced winter with cooler temperatures. I personally do. They don't actually stop growing, they just grow a little slower, but the warmer you keep these orchids, the faster they will grow. It usually blooms once a year. Mine actually bloomed twice this year. I cannot say if it's a twice-a-year bloomer or not, or she was just adapting to my climate, but I can definitely tell you she is an easy grower. I don't have issues with it, and I don't think she should get a different type of care than the typical Vandas. So of course, if you've never grown Vandas, there is a bit of a learning curve with them, being that they're so big and most of them come bare rooted or in those tall vases or in baskets and things of the sorts. But do check the description, I'll add there everything that I know about Vandas. They're really not finicky orchids. I still have my very first Vanda, I didn't lose it, and most orchid growers would agree that Vandas are indeed easy growers. They just require a little bit more attention, and particularly because they're big, a little bit more space than typical orchids. Sanderiana though is such a joy to grow. I believe it's just worth it. Just look at those flowers, and she takes no different care than any other Vanda orchid. Definitely I recommend her. Next up, a Cattleya orchid. This is the beautiful Cattleya Mosier, which is not in bloom currently. She blooms once a year for me in April or March, somewhere in the spring. She is definitely a spring bloomer, and it is the Cattleya orchid with the biggest flowers in my collection, I believe. Check down below a video of this orchid when she was in bloom. The flower is just immense. It is just such a show because the orchid herself is pretty tiny, as you can see. I wouldn't go as far as to say that she's a miniature Cattleya, but on the Cattleya scale, which can be very tall, this is quite a small Cattleya. She's very suited for tiny shelves, tiny windowsills and grow spaces and things of the sorts. She has the tendency to be slightly unruly, but definitely you can stake her. Mine sadly took a fall this summer during a storm, and I managed to really mess up this leaf, but it's okay. She's a tough little plant actually. Every year she grows one single pseudobulb, at least in my climate, per direction of growth. If you have more directions of growth, which I will try to induce in the spring, you can have multiple growths, obviously. But definitely she is a slow grower from this point of view. Also, she only blooms once a year, typically in the springtime. The month can vary a little bit, but she is known to be a spring bloomer. The flower, as I was saying, is immense, it's gorgeous, and it's also fragrant. It has a typical flowery fragrance that, to my nose, has a pretty foul underlayer, but it's very subtle, and it might just be something that I detect. Maybe not many people will detect it. It smells slightly like BO. I don't know why. Other people say it smells lovely, so if you're one of those lucky people who doesn't detect that underlayer, then what more can you want from this orchid? By the way, do let me know down below in the comment section if you've ever smelled this orchid. Is it just me? How many of you can detect a not so pleasant smell when you sniff the flower? I'm just curious due to statistics. We're all different, and the majority of people do suggest this orchid smells nice, so that's good. But you know, just for my own personal statistics. Other than that, this orchid takes no different care than any other Cattleya that I have. She likes very bright light. She was outside this summer and enjoyed it a lot. She can withstand drought, of course. She cannot be bothered by high humidity. The only thing she wants is highlight, pretty much, and she does very well in LECA. Now, there were a few questions regarding this orchid and other species, asking if they do actually take a break or a dormancy or a rest, because some articles suggest they do take a rest during winter time. I don't know what the definition of rest is according to those articles, but my orchid never takes a rest. None of my Cattleyas take rests. Yes, it matured the pseudobulb, it matured the leaf and the sheath, but look what the roots are doing. They're growing actively. I have a root tip here, I have a root here, I have multiple roots inside the medium. I would not call this a resting orchid. So I don't do anything special in the winter time other than adapt my watering routine to the conditions that I have, which I do for all orchids. Also, I don't fertilize as often because there's no need. In cool temperatures, all orchids grow slower. But I don't withhold water in any way. I keep fertilizing even more infrequently because the orchid is still growing. Not as many structures, not as abundantly, of course, but it's still growing. In my opinion, it is not dormant, not taking a rest, nothing. It is absolutely active. It's just not growing pseudobulbs and leaves. So if that's what the articles mean, then yeah, it doesn't grow new pseudobulbs during winter time, although 2 years ago when we arrived here, she did grow another pseudobulb during winter time until she pretty much got adjusted to my environment. So no, I don't believe this orchid should take dormancies, but do adapt watering and fertilizing to your conditions. Other than that, there is no special care needed for this orchid, and the reward is a huge flower that is beautiful and for most people smells really lovely as well. And the last orchid we're gonna take a look at today is the Ceratostylus rubra. This was a pretty new acquisition. I got it at the beginning of the year, I believe. It is such an interesting orchid to me. It doesn't look like anything pretty much, but it is a sympodial orchid. It produces new growths on top of each other, pretty much like the maxillaria, and the flowers come from, let's say from the crown of each growth. The flowers are really tiny, they're orange, and they have no fragrance, but you can imagine the more growths it has, the more flowers it will have as well. So if you Google the name of this orchid, you will see what I mean. It can turn into this really beautiful little bush of orange flowers, which to me is very appealing. But not only her appearance is odd and pretty in many people's eyes, she is also very easy to care for. I currently keep her in my growth space, not outside, under my artificial light. I cannot say she is a wet loving orchid. I often let her go pretty bone dry and then I rewater simply due to economy reasons, and I've never experienced wilt or anything of the sorts. She also gets a regular feeding, but nothing special in particular. The roots on this orchid are really fine though. When you repot this orchid, you will damage the root system to some extent. It's impossible not to damage it, but the orchid bounces back really fast. I had no visible setback. I wouldn't even know how setback would look like on this orchid, maybe smaller fans perhaps, but I don't think I experienced any setback, and furthermore the orchid bloomed and is currently creating new growths. So again, no dormancy, no nothing of the sorts. It doesn't require bright light, and most articles suggest she is an easy grower. She's more of a temperate type of grower, but this summer she had no issue in the heat, although my grow space was not super hot, and really there's nothing bad that I can say about this orchid. She has not fussed at all ever since I purchased it, and I do believe she looks intriguing. Now, I do understand it's not everybody's cup of tea. She's one of those more interesting types of orchids, not necessarily beautiful, but definitely if you do like these tiny little flowers, I believe this is worth a look, worth a chance. I do recommend her even to beginners. I don't think she requires special light or anything of the sorts. Again, bright shade will do just fine for this orchid. And that's about it for today's list. Before I let you go, I just wanted to add that none of these orchid species have been obtained from the wild. The species can easily be propagated as well, just like the hybrids. They're either cloned, either obtained from seed. As a general note, it is never a good idea to get orchids from their natural habitat. Most of them at least. Some of them are even protected, so be careful with that. So I just wanted to put that out there. Whatever you find for sale at reputable nurseries is propagated in cultivation. It's not obtained from the wild. And with that said, let me know down below what you think about these orchids. Have you ever grown them? And with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this. You know the drill. Like or dislike this video below. Subscribe to my channel for regular orchid videos, tutorials, Q&As, and other fun orchid subjects. And if you'd like YouTube to notify you whenever I upload a new video, just turn on notifications for my channel. Also, if you're interested in my setup and the products that I use, I do list them in the description as well. And with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!